Thanks, everyone. Kellie, lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Well, I should introduce myself. I'm Simon Wyld from System 1. And then Kellie Barnett.
Yes. Kellie Barnett, head of paid media for Frontier Communications, previously head of media for Samsung mobile experience marketing in the U.S., and then prior to that, agency experience. So,
yeah. I was going to say this is your chance because you've got family here, so you can explain to them what you actually do. Yeah. So first, starting out with, it's been interesting. CFOs have been getting a lot of mentions the last couple of days. So, they're your kind of stakeholders almost internally. So
absolutely.
How do you answer the question of where the money's going and what it's doing for us?
Yes, I think this is probably one of the core objectives of anyone in my position, not only ensuring that we reach the right audience with the most effective and efficient media mix to drive sales, but then also proving that out to your internal stakeholders, which would be typically your CEOs, your board, your CFO, for sure, finance. That has been the case both at Samsung and Frontier, right? You need to show that you're getting an ROI typically across the funnel, not just on that lower funnel with your customers that are close to point of purchase, which is always a challenge across the board.
Yeah, so how do you actually do that though? Because
creatively, right?
Because if you're talking about performance marketing, it's maybe easier to prove out, but when you're looking at things like brand or
that is more challenging. I think that probably everyone here has experienced that before, where you have to drive the brand, you have to increase brand awareness, brand consideration, or product awareness and product consideration, while still then driving overall sales and within performance marketing. So that being said, you really do have to dig in and understand how am I going to, number one, educate internally with what is the purpose of your upper funnel media mix, your mid funnel media mix, and then your lower funnel media mix. And many times companies have obviously MMMs that they use that will give you and generate an ROI and the optimal mix, but that is typically a quarter after the media has run. So what we've looked to do both at Samsung and Frontier is develop what I call a scorecard, really, where you look at overall reach of each of your media channels throughout the funnel. And then you also look at channel effectiveness. You always must have that KPI that says this is your effectiveness. This is how you're going to measure if this channel's working, if this partner's working. Utilize past data to establish that benchmark and then the target of that KPI. Look at brand lift surveys too, understanding how is the media that you're running affecting your lifts of brand awareness, brand consideration, product awareness, product consideration, which in turn, taking all three of those areas, reach, channel effectiveness, and brand lifts, can generate an ROI that you can effectively communicate to your finance and to your CEO stakeholders, which says that yes, ROI for, as an example, awareness, streaming video through YouTube is not ever going to be the same ROI within a 30-day attribution window that you're going to see with brand SEM. It is not the case, and it shouldn't be the case, and let me explain why, right? So those are the conversations I think that you have to have, and you have to push your agencies too, agency friends, to really think through speaking beyond the just media talk and media optimizations to what does this mean from a business perspective. Everyone's fighting for dollars, right? And I mean, everyone's fighting for dollars, not on the advertising side, I mean on the marketing side. When we're looking at internal distribution of your overall dollars in a corporation, how much is going to marketing? Great. Well, then how much within marketing is going to paid media? All of those areas have to show what your ROI is, and you fight internally for those dollars. Right. So I've really looked at pushing my agencies, my internal media teams, to understand that, yes, from a media planning perspective, impression, reach, channel efficiency, all of that is key. but you need to be able to draw the line between that and your business impact in order to have those conversations and get the dollars you need.
Yeah, and did that exist when you got to Frontier, or is that something you've had to change and educate?
No, that did not. That actually is something that I brought over with me from Samsung, and it is a valuable tool, I will say, to come into an organization and say, really take control of the agencies and the dialogue and help with constructing that story internally to your stakeholders to say, this is what we need in order to meet your overall sales objectives. This is the reach, this is the media mix, this is the key partners we're going to work with. But then also being able to effectively communicate the ROI, both in a 30-day window as well as in a 3 to 6 month window as well.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's you've got to prove it out quickly.
You do have to prove it out quickly. Yeah. It's funny. One of the things that I'm very passionate about, and I push both our internal media teams on the company side, but also our external agency partners, is number one, don't ever come to me with just an impression delivery and saying that's a KPI. It's not, right? But also when you look at offline media, there typically needs to be a way to understand both a short-term KPI and impact, as well as a long-term ROI. But many times I think agencies, your internal teams, get stuck with, well, but how are you going to look at a short-term radio, like a spot radio, right? Or a traditional radio, short-term KPI, if not impression delivery. And where I really push our partners is to think outside the box. How can we look at spot radio adding to the media mix in certain DMAs? And do we see, utilizing a test and control market, do we see a lift in overall traffic to our traffic rate, I should say, to our sites in those markets versus the control markets that don't have radio? Do we see lifts in Google brand search, right, terms in those markets over the control markets when spot radio is added? So I do think that where there is a will, there is a way to understand attribution in a loose way between offline and then online visits to your site.
Got you. Yeah, and how do you work with your creative teams when it's because one of the things we always talk about is it's having that consistency. So you may have your big kind of brand ad, and then at your performance level, often those can be completely different and don't really talk to each other. And
Sure. I think, how do I work with my creative partners? Very closely, and I'm starting to work with them even more closely. And what do I mean by that? Let's be clear here. You can have the best media plan, media mix in the market, and if your creative is not good, it is not going to perform, right? So one of the things that I look at across the board is, from a creative perspective, number one, and this was the same at Samsung, it's the same here at Frontier, which is, by and far, I look at media partners that I invest our paid media dollars with as, I'm investing in you, I expect you to invest in me. And what do I mean by that? I mean by real-time feedback on creative that's working, on opportunities, on creator, influencer trends that are happening on their platforms, and how can we then get that information quickly, work with our creative team, and get updated creative back into the mix. It is key, especially when you look at social platforms. One of the things that I've really been driving with our creative team is understanding that typically, and by and far, that you're not going to be able to take your traditional 30-second, 15-second ad unit and run it on Meta or run it on TikTok or run it on YouTube and get the same type of engagement, the same type of performance as you would if you have some great influencer content that you can then edit and traffic into paid media that you can then put up against all of your traditional creative. I've seen seen somewhere in the range of, and this is just since being at Frontier, increases in engagement and increases in overall efficiency upwards of 30% when you rotate in creative that is not even bespoke for that platform, but more appropriate for that platform. So with that, I say you don't have media performance that lives without a close working relationship with your creative partners, both in-house as well as on the agency side.
Yeah, and do you think that's changed? Because it feels like people are getting smarter
Yes.
about that over the last few years.
I do.
Where it was like, we just do a cut down. And it was,
I absolutely do, and I'll tell you why. I think it's as we have leaned into more of the mix across funnel, going into social platforms, then it becomes even more imperative that we have creative that feels native to those platforms and feels that it's speaking to those audiences on those platforms and not just putting in a 15-second ad.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting. It's definitely been it's been something you noticed over the last few years, and it's been, even people talking about it here for
Oh, absolutely. But then that's to say that not all creative is going to perform the same across different platforms. As an example, with Samsung, we had partnerships with Mr. Beast, and we took Mr. Beast creative and we cut it down and we put it into paid media, both on within Meta and within YouTube. And what we saw is that the creative, the Mr. Beast creative on YouTube actually performed significantly better than it did on Meta, and that is because YouTube is a platform that obviously makes sense for Mr. Beast creative to perform well on. So these type of learnings can then, with an open and fluid conversation between media and your creative teams, you can have the real-time learnings, not only to optimize your creative that's in market today, but to then work to build creative that's going to perform even better that you can put into the mix later.
Yeah. And how's it been like, because I know you were at Samsung quite a long time.
I was there 4 years, yes.
So, I mean, how's the change been? Because I presume your budgets were probably a bit bigger. You had a bigger team.
You know what? It's exciting across the board to be hired to lead a media team, both at Samsung and obviously at Frontier, both with different challenges, both with different objectives. I will say coming to Frontier felt almost like going home, because I didn't mention this, but my first 15 years in my career was spent on the agency side working in tier 2 automotive spot advertising. So that's really it's bringing everything together at Frontier.
Yeah. Completing the circle.
Yeah, complete circle. Yeah.
And then thinking about sort of optimization as you work. So how do you manage that kind of process?
Right.
Where you're kind of constantly having to adjust and
constantly. Yes. Well, I think it's level setting with your agencies, with your in-staff team. And first things first, be it whether I was on really at Samsung or here, is understanding your role, your in-house team's role versus that of which you pay the agency, right? I think no one wants you want to maximize your resources across the board. And with that said, I think coming on to understand and push the agency, they're the ones that are going to be doing the real-time optimizations. What I look as my role and my team's role internally is to have access to dashboards that we can also double check, because at the end of the day, it's our business. It's our responsibility to understand performance, looking at weekly reports and weekly actual touch-ins with our agency partners, and then monthly deep dives where it really looks at, this is what we're seeing from a creative perspective. This is what we're seeing from an audience perspective. I mean, obviously we all know there's not one shoe that fits all target audiences, right? So we like to have insights against those segmentations of different audiences that we have.
Yeah. So I mean, when you're talking about, because how do you, if you're talking about some tight segment, how do you actually track that? How do you keep an eye on that?
Sure. I will tell you from a segmentation perspective, and that, I mean, you essentially, what the agency would have to do is you set up the buys differently in different platforms, right? So that you can understand what your Hispanic targeting is doing against, potential movers within Frontier versus gamers, these different target audiences that we have. But another tool that I find very useful, and one that I'm pushing my internal team to look at and work with our e-com team on, is Adobe Analytics on the back end. So many times I think that internally teams are drawn to using that last touch attribution to say, oh, this is really performing. Let's put more money here. I don't know how many times I've had to tell my e-com team, I wish I could put more money into brand search. Unfortunately, brand search captures demand. It doesn't drive demand, right? So I feel like this is a conversation we all have. That's why it's so important to push your team to really understand what type of tools and analytics do we have at our disposal to have these conversations internally and to say, yes, there's value to brand SEM, actually, absolutely. Yeah. But look at where that first touch, that multi-touch, look at all the value that all of this other media is driving as well.
Yeah, because I guess you've got to feed that funnel.
Well, you sure do.
Yeah. But I mean, just in terms of the way digital and things like that have changed the way that funnel operates now. Yeah, it's like less of a linear journey, and that probably never was really a linear journey.
It probably never was a linear journey, but I do think that I know many people say the funnel's dead. I don't necessarily believe that. At the end of the day, you have to drive, whether you have a brand issue or a product awareness issue or a consideration issue, you have to drive scale and reach of an audience or a new audience, right? You have to get them to not only be aware of your product and your brand, but also consider it, which I have found that mid-funnel, honestly, that mid-funnel audience and conversion, the trickiest to get my arms around, which is key. But you have to move people from not knowing your product, not knowing your brand, to point of purchase. And it really just depends on the category that you're working with and working in to understand how long that journey is, and within different audiences, how quickly they'll move through it.
Yeah, and then because another thing, because I used to work for B-Sky B in the UK, so I used a similar kind of, and churn was always the big question. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you talk to your current customers? Yeah. And how do they fit into that whole kind of...
Well, I mean, there is the lifetime value of your current customer base is key, right? Yeah. You want to obviously drive acquisition, but let's be clear, reducing churn is key within any category. So I think that you have to be aware of, you have to work very closely with your product marketing teams, with your e-com departments, to understand who are these audiences, and honestly, what are the triggers that we can see digitally online. For an example, with our current customers, what are potential triggers of online behavior that we can identify that'll say, okay, guys, we need to then segment this audience into a potential churn in the next 30 days. Let's start offering them creative with additional promos, it all works together. But I think that it's key to understand not just driving acquisition, but reducing churn as well.
Yeah. And then in the intro, apparently it's getting easier. So, but what are the tools that you think are going to help you in the future, or where do you think it's going to, where this is all leading to?
Where is this all leading to?
Where's it all going?
I think the dream is to have a multi-touch attribution modeling that you feel confident in real time. Yeah. Whether we get there or not, I'm not sure. But what I am sure of is there are tools at our disposal now that you, as a media strategist, need to be either on the agent's side or internal in departments, need to be aware of and cognizant of. iSpot, Kantar, obviously Adobe. There's a number of these that you need to be aware of, because you do need to push yourself to think of, how can I use what is at my disposal currently to understand both real-time and long-term effectiveness of my media mix in order to optimize accordingly.
Yeah, because I mean, how do you manage spend at the moment? If you know what I mean, in terms, do you have? I think we talk about the kind of 60-40 model, where 60% is brand, 40% is.
Oh no, I think right now, I mean, specifically,
it's
with
different by category, but yeah,
it's different by category, 100%. It's always based on what your overall objectives are, right? So, I think what is key from an internal marketing department that is a media arm of that marketing team is to be in lockstep with your marketing partners to understand what are our objectives here. What is the objective? How much increased awareness? How many new customers do we have to bring in order to convert throughout the funnel again and meet overall sales objectives? And that is very different by category, by product, but you do have to be very close to them to understand what those objectives are, and then you have to understand the most effective media and the most effective partners that are going to get you there.
Yeah. And then we've got a few minutes left. I don't know, do you want to do some questions? Or?
Oh, yes, let's go.
Any questions from anyone?
Yeah.
Try to talker, so I'll try to.
You want a mic? There's an mic.
We'll try.
Okay.
I love what you were saying about getting creative with how you measure your with the upper funnel and generating activities. So your test, your control, and all that. So in instances where you might have focused on the entire company working on, it's not just paid, it's phone, it's earned media, PR, it's specialized price points or discounts that you're bringing to you. When you're looking at whose correlations of lifting traffic, lifting conversion, how do you build trust with your leaders that it was paid media?
That it was media? Great. I think the question is, in case everyone can hear at the back of the room, is how do you communicate to your internal stakeholders to drive trust that lifts in brand traffic or that brand lifts overall are due to paid media versus other like PR, influencer, and so forth. And I will say this fully is, number one, paid media obviously does not live by itself, right? Like it's a full marketing effort that gets us to where we're going. But what I will say is when you look at paid media in particular, and this does depend on the budgets that you have, right? Always, if you have enough money to use and utilize a Kantar, or I say Kantar, but any type of brand lift survey, right? That is typically an exposed versus non-exposed audience. You can build that into your scorecard. You can build it into how you speak and educate your leadership. That again, it's not just overall reach of an audience, it's not channel efficiency only, but also that brand lift or that product lift, both in upper funnel and mid funnel, is key to driving people all the way to point of conversion. So I think it's a way that you, number one, utilize brand lift surveys for your paid media in particular, and then it's how do you build that into your report card, scorecard, conversations with your internal stakeholders, so that really they understand the value of those lifts in upper and mid funnel in order to get to their sales objectives. Yeah.
I think you talked a little bit about being for platform creative,
yes,
kind of jumping on cultural trends and participating more in these real-time platforms. How has that changed your planning cycle in terms of how you go to market?
Sure.
Being able to be reactive and dynamic.
Is there a traditional planning cycle anymore? I feel like it's always on. Yeah, I think that when you're talking about platform-specific creative discussions and creative optimizations, that is an always-on, always active conversation, and it does not live alone with the media team. It has to include your creative teams, your creative partners as well, in order for us all to understand, number one, again, real-time learnings, right? I think I used the example of including influencer-developed creative in your paid mix if the quality is there, and many times we'll see increases in performance immediately. Also, I think that it's key to have these ongoing discussions most specifically with your social partners that I would call your primary media partners. And it could be a Google, it could be Meta, Reddit, TikTok. Bring them in. Say that as your client, I have a choice whether I can spend my money with you or spend it more with these guys over here. And then put the onus on them to educate you and your creative team about ways to optimize your creative ongoing to be most effective on their platform. But this isn't, I think there's a way to look at overall media planning cycles. Those typically do align with when budgets are released or when we have to go to market. It is what it is. The discussions about creative and creative optimizations and creative performance and insights, that's ongoing every day of the week, right?
We might have time for one more. Any more? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kellie.
Thank
That was
you.
great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.